Hi and welcome to this video on IT strategy planning and investment. So in this video I'm going to explain what IT strategy planning or generally strategy planning is, why we do strategy planning, the challenges that we face in that process, as well as some of the steps that we can take during the strategy planning process. And then we'll briefly look at SWOT and PEST analysis and the importance of an IT strategy. So what generally is strategic planning all about? So strategic planning is about an organization coming up with the direction or the plan that they want to adopt for the next 3 to 5 years or whatever period of time that they define. And based on that strategy or plan, they then make decisions on how they're going to allocate their resources to make sure that they fulfill and achieve that strategy. So the strategy basically focuses on answering questions such as, what is it that we want to do? How are we going to achieve what we want to do? Where are we right now? How can we move from where we are to where we want to be? And how can IT, when we are not talking specifically of an IT strategy, how can IT assist the organization in achieving its overall goals? So the IT strategy is not developed as a standalone strategy that is not connected to anything else. The IT strategy is meant to fulfill and assist in the achieving of the corporate strategy. So the most important thing that we need to keep in mind is that the corporate strategy is the thing that we are trying to achieve as we come up with our IT strategy. So the IT strategy is simply meant to help the organization in achieving its corporate strategy. So in developing a strategy, or IT strategy in particular, there is no real one way of developing it. It all depends on the various factors at play, at what you want to achieve. At times what you want to achieve is profitability, at times you want to do cost containment, at times you want to have the best talent in the organization. So based on what you want to do, the way you come up with the strategy will differ on a case-by-case basis. So why do we embark on the strategic planning process? One of the reasons is that these days the competition or the competitive environment that we now live in requires things to change frequently, as things also are changing rapidly in the operating environment. So the various or the numerous changes that will be occurring require us also to adjust our plans so that we stay relevant to the changing market, to the changing customers, to the changing global situation or politics that are at play. Then we also engage in strategic planning so that we are future oriented. As we see the world evolve, we also need to be able to predict and plan for the future and for things that are going to happen in the future. So our strategy at times may not focus on what we want right now, but can also be geared to achieve certain goals in the future. The strategy is also meant to help us look in the long term to say, you know what, we're a business that's currently doing software development as our main service. Is there any way that we can actually expand our products and services to be able to be profitable in the future? Also, are people really still interested in software, or now they just want to have software as a service, they just want to have infrastructure as a service, so they may not require us to be developing these things or selling these things, but we may now need to package them in a different way. So the strategy now helps us to look at things from a long-term perspective and see where the market or the trends are going and be able to adjust accordingly. Some of the benefits that we can get from strategy planning include performance. So there's performance improvement. For example, if we say in the case of our systems, we can decide that we want to improve the speed with which our systems process transactions. So if it's a database server, we may say instead of doing 10,000 transactions per second, now we wanted to be able to do 30,000 transactions per second. So our strategy now is supposed to be geared towards making sure that we have the right resources, both human and infrastructure-wise, that can help us to improve the performance of our systems. It can also help in terms of performance of the human capital, as well as the growth of the human capital and our customer base as well, and our profitability. So in terms of growth, there could be many things that could grow, as you said: human capital, profitability, our customers, our systems, you name it. We can also be able to communicate better when we have a strategic plan. We know exactly where we want to go based on our strategy. We know exactly what we want to achieve. So when it comes to communicating as an IT department to the executives, what it is that we want to achieve, it becomes easy because we already have it documented and we have clearly articulated it in everything in that IT strategic document that we have come up with. So you'll find that when we are coming up with this IT strategy, there are certain things that are always going to show up. So there is number one, the human capital. How does the IT strategy help, or how is it helped by the human capital in the organization? Number two, we're going to look at our systems, or the capacity and utilization of our systems, as well as its performance. What kind of systems do we have? Are those systems adequate? Then number three, we are also going to look at the cost of those things. We're going to look at how costly is it to actually either hire the required human capital or acquire the required infrastructure. So you'll find that in whatever you're doing in IT, you'll be focusing on people, which is the human capital, processes, which is the facilitation of business by through the use of IT, and then there's the technology itself. What are the actual tools that you're going to be using? So when you combine the people, the processes, the technology, the human capital, the infrastructure, and the cost, you will get a good picture of what your strategy can do, where you are, where you want to be, and how you can actually use your strategy to get to where you want to be. So in coming up with this strategy, you have to look at what are your strengths and weaknesses, and that's what we're going to look at when we look at our SWOT analysis and best analysis. So in developing a strategy, you are going to face some challenges. One of those challenges is that in developing a strategy, at times when you really want to move from where you are and become better, you need to think outside the box. And thinking outside the box is really difficult, especially when you don't know what the box is and if you don't even know whether you're in the box or not. So it requires you to think differently, which at times requires you to hire external consultants or to get people from who will give you an external perspective to things. Because if you come up with a strategy just based on the team that is already in the organization, then there are chances that you're just going to get the same of what you already have. So at times in coming up with different ways of doing things, you need different minds, and hence you may need to outsource some of the strategic planning to experts or consultants who can help you think outside the box. Secondly, it's also a process that takes time. So one of the challenges is that you might end up taking too long to come up with a strategic plan, such that by the time you're done with it, it's no longer relevant. So timing is key in coming up with a strategic plan. And the amount of time you take should not be too little, not too long. You have to take just enough time to be able to come up with a plan. So if it's a 5-year plan that you're coming up with, I think if you can develop it within the first 3 to 6 months of that 5 years, then that would be quite a good time, because after those 3 to 6 months, then you can be able now to, after every 3 months, to evaluate whether the plan is actually on track, whether you're actually being able to achieve it, and the like. It can also be difficult to implement your plan, especially when you lack leadership. If your leaders are not invested in the plan, then it's really difficult to come up with something that can be used and implemented. It's also difficult when you don't have the right resources, and these resources could be both infrastructure as well as the human capital that we're talking of. And also if you have too many priorities, where you're trying to achieve too many things at one go. So when coming up with the strategic plan, it means then we need to prioritize what it is that we want to do. And out of those things that have been prioritized, we should not try to achieve all of them, but we should try to achieve a certain number of them. So one of the best ways of achieving anything that you want to do is to come up with 3 to 5 things that you really want to achieve, and just focus on those 3 to 5 things at one time. So you also need to look at how much time you are going to implement the strategic plan over. So if it's a 3-year plan, you may choose 2 or 3 goals. If it's a 5-year plan, you may choose 3 to 5 goals, depending on how big or how much investment is required for you to achieve those things. So in coming up with the strategic plan, you always need to start with the end in mind. What is it that you want to achieve? Then you work from there, looking at where you are and trying to fill in the gap in between. So you need to look at your proposed projects, the budgets, the timelines, and see if all these things continue to support the overall vision of the organization, the overall vision of IT, as well as the goals of the organization. So the goals of the organization may not necessarily be profitability at all times, because some organizations are non-profit, but it may also be good service. So you need to always make sure that whatever you're planning or including in your strategy is sticking to your proposed projects. You have the money to achieve it, you can achieve it in a timely manner, and it sticks and also helps to achieve the visions of the organization. So you realize that the whole idea behind the adoption of technology in an organization is not that just we have something fancy, but we use technology in an organization because technology acts as an enabler. It acts as a facilitator for the various processes or various functions that we are doing in an organization. So simply put, the IT is just meant to assist the organization. So whenever you're thinking of IT, and also when coming up with the IT strategic plan, you need to remember that IT is a servant to the organization. It's a tool that is being used to achieve a greater goal. And then now that applies when you're talking of IT when it comes to internal processes. When you're talking of IT in terms of customers facing systems, then you realize that IT is actually a tool that can increase, number one, market share, number two, profitability, and it can also help you maximize your customer segmentation and as well as market penetration due to the use of the right tools at the right time. So in delivering IT projects, you need to understand whether it's being used for an internal process, which means it's being used as a servant tool or as a facilitator or as an enabler to achieve a certain goal, which is usually efficiency and effectiveness of processes. Then if it's IT or if a technology is being used as a customer facing system, then your goal is to make sure that it gives the customer the best service so that we can gain market share as well as increase profitability of the organization. And then when you're also looking at the IT strategy plan, as you develop the IT strategy, you need to think of governance issues to see how you can actually be able to implement and enforce all the governance issues that would have been discussed. Now there's a different video that focuses on IT governance frameworks and IT governance issues, and you can look at that when it comes to issues to do with governance. So now when it comes to actually coming up with an IT strategy, what is the process that you follow? Now, as we said before, the processes that you follow differ. It's not a one-size-fits-all for all, but you will find that there are things that will always be common among the various processes that we take. So in the next few minutes, we're going to look at some of the processes that you can take, and then the one that I would suggest that you focus on for you to be able to master the IT strategic planning process. So in this approach right now, which is on the screen, shows that there's the project initiation stage where you initiate the project. You actually tell the executive or whoever is concerned that you want to develop the IT strategy. In so doing, you assemble a team, you look at your costs or your potential costs and everything. Then you start with that team to define your business strategy, business priorities, your assumptions, as well as your overall vision for IT. Under this stage, now you're just looking at your strategic context. What is it that as an organization we really want to achieve? Where are we as an organization? What are we prioritizing? And based on those things, now you'll be able to move into the next stage where you say, okay, currently how effective are our IT processes and systems? That's when you look at the customer perception. Are our customers happy with what we are doing? We look at the performance of our systems. Our systems delivering the right value for money to both the internal customers, which is the staff, as well as the external customers, which is our customers in the market. Then you also look at how we are actually managing and governing IT. Are we actually getting the best value from our IT systems based on the management and governance that we have? So at times you may have the best system. For example, you can have a very fast car, but if it's being driven at 50 kilometers per hour when it can go at 300 kilometers per hour, then at times you may not be getting the right value. You may end up getting to Blawayo in 10 hours instead of getting there in 2 hours. So it's actually important to look at whether the people who are managing IT actually know the value that can be obtained based on what we currently have as well as what we can get out there. So when we have looked at our strategic context and the effectiveness of our IT and systems and environment or governance at that time, then we start to analyze the gaps between what we have and where we want to go. So in analyzing the gaps, you look at the management of IT. Do we have the right management processes? Do we have the right people in place? Do we have the right applications and technologies that can help us to get to the next stage? When we realize what our gaps are based on where we are and where we want to go, then we start developing the strategy. That's why we come up with different alternatives that we can adopt. We evaluate all those alternatives. So this is part of the systems approach of problem solving that you can actually see in another video that I made for this course. So you look at the various alternative strategies that you can come up with. Then based on those various strategies, you select what you feel is the actual strategy that is good. And then you develop a plan based on that best strategy that you have chosen. After you develop the plan, you then communicate the strategy through a strategy communication document that you create, or an IT strategic plan that you create, and then you also come up with a plan on how you're going to implement the strategy. So this process, this is one of many processes. So this one basically looks at you initiate the process of coming up with an IT strategy. You look at your strategy context and your IT effectiveness. Based on those two, you look at the gaps that exist between where you are and where you want to go, and then you develop various strategies. After which you choose the best strategy, then you define your plan and you communicate and implement the plan. Another strategy process that you can look at, this one is quite straightforward, where we are just looking at the strategy. Firstly, this is the videow IT approach, where you can firstly ask yourself questions like the strategy question: are we doing the right things? Based on that question, you look at yourself and say, are we actually giving our customers what they want? Are we actually using the right systems to improve our processes? After you've gotten your answers to that, you then move to the next stage, the architecture question. Are we doing them the right way? So you're now looking at your systems. Are they actually being used in the way that they're supposed to be used? Are they actually configured in a way that allows the users to do as they expect? Then you look at the delivery question. Are we getting them done well? Are we actually getting either our IT processes or IT service delivery done well in the context of both customers and internal staff? Then we look at the value question. Are we getting the value from those systems? So you find that this is a cyclical process where after asking each question, you move on to another and you continue this process over a period of time. So you can choose the amount of time that you want to focus on one or the other question and how long it should take you to iterate. So some can say we are supposed to answer all the 4 questions within a period of 3 months, 6 months, or 5 years, depending on how long your strategy is being implemented and adopted. But the main strategic planning process that I want you to focus on is this one. So this one really outlines the steps that you can take in coming up with a strategic planning process, or coming up with a strategy for your IT department. With this one now, there are clearly laid out steps that will lead you from the very first step you take to come up with the strategy right up to the stage where you finally have the strategy and you are continually reviewing it. So initially you're going to gather facts from all the people concerned, and then you're going to do a SWOT analysis where you're going to look at your strengths, your weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and you're also going to look at the SWOT matrix, which we'll look at in the next slide. Then you review the inputs that have been given by the various stakeholders, the SWOT analysis that you did, and then from there you come up with key statements that show how you have interpreted the information that you have gotten to this point. After that, you then come up with the SWOT matrix, where you're looking at your strength against your opportunities, weaknesses against your opportunities, threats against strengths, and threats against weaknesses. And there you are now trying to see how you can actually beat or take advantage of your opportunities, as well as how you can actually lessen the threats that come with your weaknesses. Based on that information that you've gotten from reviewing your inputs and coming up with the strategic matrix, you then come up with your initial strategy. Here you define the objectives that you want to achieve. Then you look at your short and long-term goals, as well as how you're actually going to implement this. So you find that this plan is also adopting what is actually being spoken of here in the define strategy stage. Then after you've come up with your strategy and defined your goals and objectives and the plans, then you send it back to the various stakeholders. Stakeholders could be the finance team, the sales team, the IT team, anybody who is concerned with IT or who is affected by whatever IT is doing is then supposed to review your plan, and then they give their feedback, and then This can be adjusted necessary at a time that has been set. So you could say initially you could review it after every month, and then you move to 3 months, and then to 6 months, and then start reviewing it after a year, depending on the lifespan of the strategy that you're trying to implement. So I would want you to really understand this expanded strategy planning process, and also to just use it in context with these two, which can also help you to understand what the strategy planning process is all about. How do you come up with an IT strategy? So as we have said before, we will also look at the SWOT matrix. So the SWOT matrix is basically trying to find what happens or what exists as you look at two different things at the same time. For example, you could look at your strengths against your opportunities. Based on the strengths that you have and the opportunities you have, what you're trying to find out is how can your strengths be used to take advantage of your opportunities? How can your weaknesses be overcome using your opportunities? How can your threats be overcome using your strengths? And how can your weaknesses actually accentuate your threats? And at times, how can your weaknesses also assist in the overcoming of your threats? So with SWOT Matrix now, you're trying to see how you can actually close the gaps between your opportunities and your threats, as well as your strengths and your weaknesses, with the idea of increasing or maximizing your strengths and opportunities and decreasing the effects or impacts of your threats and weaknesses. Then we look at the PEST analysis. So the PEST analysis is basically looking at your political, economic, social, and technological environment. So you find that SWOT Matrix may focus more on internal issues to do with the organization or your IT department, but PEST analysis will look more to do with your external environment or your operating environment. What is the kind of political climate that exists in the environment that you want to launch your business, launch your product, or develop whatever you want to develop? Are the regulatory bodies fair? Are the processes good? Are the laws good? What kind of funding, grants are available, as well as whether there is possibility for you to actually grow in such a market. Then the economic issues as well will concern things to do with taxation, things to do with market availability, distribution trends, the interests of the people, the seasonality of the market, as well as general issues around the economy. Then social will also look at what the kind of people you have there, their cultures, their lifestyles, the laws around social issues, the brands, the companies that exist in that company, the role models, etc. So those are the things that will influence and affect your brand socially. Then we'll look at technological issues that will do with what kind of technologies are available in that operating environment, what kind of technologies can you bring to that environment, what are the kind of regulations around technology, and how expensive is it to actually have technology imported and used in such an environment. So we have looked at the strategic planning process and SWOT and PEST analysis. Let's just quickly go through a summary of these things, or some tips and suggestions that can be used in when coming up with an IT strategy. So as we said, number one, gather all facts. You need to know everything and everyone. Then number two, make sure you've got clearly written objectives of each section that's going to be affected by this, and as well as the objectives of the IT department alone. So what you now need to do is to look at what is it that wants to be achieved overall, what are the objectives of the organization overall, and then you try to match them both in the long and in the short term to the objectives of the IT department. You also need to benchmark your objectives either using past performance or external factors or external competitors that can help you to come up with benchmarks to see if you're actually doing very well. So what is the importance of an IT strategy? The IT strategy helps us to begin with the end in mind, as we said before. It helps us to enable delegation of decision making. So we now know if we have an IT strategy, we can actually know who is going to focus on what and who is supposed to own that process and make sure that it succeeds. It allows us to respond to change by actually reviewing it frequently, and by looking at the external factors as they change, we can actually adjust ourselves to be able to meet the external changes. It also gives us parameters for creative thinking. We now know the bounds within which we are supposed to be creative. So an IT strategy acts both as a boundary to what we are supposed to do, and it also acts as a mapper or a map to what we are supposed to be doing. Then it also addresses shadow IT. So with shadow IT, this is where you come up with systems or IT processes that are not under the preview of the management or under the preview of the governance team. So by having a strategy and making sure that the governance team is also included in that strategy, you can get rid of shadow IT. We'll look at this more when we talk of when we look at the video on governance frameworks. Then your strategic plan helps you to communicate your intentions to senior leadership. So at the end of the day, our IT strategy is a way for us to communicate to the executive of the organization that this is what we want to do as the IT team. So the strategic planning document helps us to communicate in a clear and organized way to management, such that they can actually see whether it benefits the organization, whether it actually deserves to be supported, and where it may need to be changed in order for it to be congruent with the organization's goals. Now, an IT strategy, a strategic plan is not necessarily tactical or prescriptive. It's supposed to be general enough to allow you to adjust yourselves whenever there's a change in the operating environment. So it should not tell you exactly what you're supposed to do in terms of the technologies you're going to use, or in terms of the skills and techniques that you're going to employ. But it should rather just map the direction, and then you find your way as you move along in that direction. And also, a strategic planning is a document that always changes. So it's not a document that's static. You're always going to be reviewing it at times that you set for yourselves in the organization. As I said before, it will be 3 to 6 or 1 year or 3 year periods. So it's up to you to look at how you can actually adjust it. So this is all about IT strategy planning and investment, and I hope you have learned a lot. Please continue looking at this video. If you don't understand anything and you have any questions, you can ask me at any time. Thank you.